My name is Gabriel Ferreira de Andrade, but for a long time, that name meant nothing to almost anyone. I was born in a small town in the interior of Minas Gerais, a place where time seemed to move slowly and people talked more about others' lives than their own. Their being different was almost a crime. And I was always different. My older brother, Lucas, was the son every father wants. Good grades, good at soccer, friendly, charismatic. When he walked down the street, the neighbors smiled. When I passed by, they asked if I was still failing the year. At our house, there wasn't much room for mistakes. My father, José Andrade, was a hard man. A lifelong farmer, he believed the world gave nothing to those who thought too much and did too little. A guy who thinks too much ends up losing his way, he used to say. And I thought too much. My mother, Dona Teresa, was a quiet woman. Not because she lacked opinions, but because she learned early on that her voice was worth less than silence. She lived for her children, but it was clear there was a difference in how she looked at Lucas and me. With him pride. With me worry. As if she was always waiting for the moment I would disappoint her again. I wasn't dumb. Quite the opposite. I had a great love for books, maps, words. I spent hours locked in the small back room reading everything I could get my hands on, from Machado de Assis to old encyclopedias I found at a thrift store. But that meant nothing in my family. Reading books doesn't fill your belly, my father would say. The first big humiliation came when I was 15. It was a Sunday family lunch. Uncles, cousins, neighbors gathered. My father raised his beer glass and said, "To my son Lucas, who got first place in the law course in Belo Horizonte." Everyone applauded. Then he turned to me. "And Gabriel, well, he's still trying to finish high school, right, son?" Laughter. I smiled on the outside, but inside, something died. That night, I wrote in an old notebook, "One day I will make this name mean something. Even if it's far from here." And that's how my escape began. Not just any escape, but a desperate search for something I didn't yet know the name of. Respect, recognition, maybe all of that combined. I left home with a backpack and 300 reis in my pocket. It was at dawn. I didn't say goodbye to anyone. Not even my mother. I left a note on the dresser. "I need to try to become someone. Don't look for me." I took a bus to Belo Horizonte and from there to Brasilia. I had no plan, no contacts. Just an old dream stuck in my chest and an overwhelming desire to prove to myself that I was more than what that town told me. The first days were brutal. I slept at bus stations, shared meals with strangers, and was even kicked out of a public restroom where I tried to spend the night. No one expected me anywhere. And that hurt. The cold of the early morning, the smell of the street, the sound of cars and indifference left their mark. Each sleepless night was a cruel reminder. You belong nowhere. Sometimes I thought about going back. Swallowing my pride, apologizing to my father and trying to live a quiet life on the farm. But then I remembered the laughter at Sunday lunch. My mother's look. And I kept going. One hot October afternoon I met Dona Marina. An old lady with white hair tied in a tight bun, thick glasses and a sweet but firm voice. She saw me sitting on the sidewalk reading a dirty, torn book I had found in the trash. "Where do you live, boy?" she asked. "Nowhere, ma'am." She looked at me for a few seconds and said, "Someone who reads with this kind of hunger shouldn't be sleeping on the streets. Come with me." And so, for the first time since I left home, someone reached out their hand to me without wanting anything in return. She didn't ask about my past. Didn't want to know what I had done or failed to do. She just saw me. And that was more than any material help. Dona Marina was a retired teacher. She lived alone in a small house full of books, old paintings and the smell of coffee. She gave me a room, fed me and imposed one rule. If I wanted to stay I had to study. And study hard. She introduced me to her friends as my new adopted grandson. She always said, "This boy has a mind. He just needs a chance." With her help I got a scholarship at a community prep course. I studied like someone fighting to breathe. Every book was a weapon. Every class a step away from who I had been. Sometimes I woke up in the middle of the night with nightmares. I dreamed I had gone back home and that my father laughed at me again. But when I opened my eyes and saw the stack of books on the nightstand, I took a deep breath. I was far away. I was trying. I got accepted into the social sciences program at the University of Brasilia. The day I saw my name on the list was one of the most emotional days of my life. I cried, screamed, hugged Dona Marina so hard she had to ask me to stop. She looked at me with teary eyes and said, Now you start writing your story, my son. On the first day of class, I sat at the back, trembling. The boy my family doubted would finish high school, was at university. And for the first time I felt that maybe, just maybe, I had a place in the world. And that place, I was going to fight for it with nails, words, and soul. The University of Brasilia was a new world, full of voices, ideas, protests, and contradictions. A place where no one knew my past, where I was no longer Lucas's dumb brother or the failure from the small town. But even though this new space gave me a chance to be someone different, my voice still seemed to find no echo. At first, I felt like a stranger in unknown land. Classmates came from well-off families, could quote international authors naturally, spoke of trips and conferences, and there I was, trying to decipher words that until then only existed in books, not in my reality. But I was a good listener. Maybe because I had spent my life silent. I observed, took notes, absorbed like a sponge. And little by little, without them noticing, I started to become relevant in discussion groups. First as an attentive listener. Then as the one who raised his hand with a precise question, a sharp observation, a query that turned silence into debate. My first participation in a seminar was a disaster. My voice failed, my hand trembled, and when I finished speaking, an awkward silence filled the room. Some whispered. Others just looked away. I left feeling the weight of all the years I was disbelieved. I almost gave up. But the next week I came back. Better prepared, firmer. And I was heard. A professor named Marcos Valente was the first to really notice me. A respected sociologist, a convinced Marxist, known for being strict and impatient with unprepared students. But something in me caught his attention. Maybe it was my thirst for learning or the way I connected theory to my real-life experience. "You don't speak like someone who read this in a book," he told me one day. "You speak like someone who lived every line." It was with him that I started getting involved in research groups and student debates. And there, among pamphlets, heated meetings, and hallways crowded with posters, I discovered something I never imagined. I was good at politics. Not the politics of deals, but the politics of ideas, causes, struggles. I started writing texts for the academic journal, organized debates about inequality and meritocracy, and soon was invited to join the student council. The boy no one listened to, was now speaking in front of more than 100 students. At my first big speech, my hands were sweating, my heart felt like it would jump out of my chest. But when I finished, talking about the chasm between elite students and scholarship students who shared lunches to pay rent, I was applauded standing up. A student came up to me and said, "I had never heard anyone talk about our pain with so much truth." That night I lay down and cried. Not out of sadness, but because for the first time my voice was not only heard, it was felt. Dona Marina, always attentive, clipped every mention of me in the university bulletins. He kept everything in a folder. "This will help when you run for office," she joked. I laughed, not knowing one day it would become true. But along with recognition came the weight. I began to realize that the more I spoke, the more responsibilities fell on me. Other scholarship students sought me out to vent. Professors asked me to mediate conflicts. And inside I wrestled with the constant fear of disappointing. Of not living up to what was expected of me. One day, amid meetings and deadlines, I received the news. Dona Marina was sick. An aggressive cancer, advanced stage. I rushed to the hospital. She was weak but lucid. She held my hand and said, "You are already more than I ever dreamed. Never let them silence you again." She died 2 weeks later. I buried my greatest ally. And with the pain came a new fire. The certainty that I could not stop. I returned to university hungrier than ever. I graduated with honors. And at the end of the ceremony, while everyone celebrated with champagne and smiling families, I stood there looking up at the sky. I whispered, "I did it, Dona Marina. I did it." But little did I know, that was just the beginning. After graduating, while many classmates were looking for jobs at big consulting firms or planning to study abroad, I found myself facing an abyss. Go back to the city where no one believed in me or leap into an uncertain future in Brasilia. I chose the uncertain. I didn't just want a diploma hanging on the wall. I wanted to make an impact. For real. And that's when politics knocked on my door, or rather pushed me right in. It all started with a social project created by former UNB students in one of the most vulnerable areas of the federal district. It was called Voces do Entorno, Voices from the Surroundings. and it brought political education and community mediation to neighborhoods forgotten by governments. They invited me to give a workshop on citizenship and inequality. At the first meeting, only 4 young people showed up. At the second, 23. By the third, more than 80. It was as if those people, invisible to the eyes of the political elite, thirsted for someone who spoke their language. Someone who not only knew the theories but had also come from the same ground, the same pains. I looked into their eyes and saw myself years ago, sitting on the sidewalk with a torn book in hand and an impossible hunger to ignore. Soon the project gained traction. We were featured in local newspapers. One day, after a heated lecture about public education, I was called by an assistant to then State Deputy Reynaldo Moret. I barely knew the name, but he had heard about me. "The deputy wants to talk. He said you're one of the few young voices with sharp discourse and feet on the ground," she said. I accepted the invitation. I entered that office a bit nervous. The room was spacious, full of books that seemed like mere decoration. Reynaldo welcomed me with a wide smile and a curious look. He listened to every word I said without interrupting. Then he made me an offer to work as a social coordinator in his office. I would have a salary, access to committees, and most importantly, freedom to continue grassroots projects. It was a tough choice. Part of me feared becoming what I had always criticized, a young man co-opted by the political machine. But I accepted. And over time I realized that inside that system, there were also people wanting change. They just didn't know how to make it happen. In the following months, I wrote speeches, proposed public hearings, and pushed for bills. I began to rattle cages. Big shots started to notice that kid from the outskirts, who spoke clearly, convinced crowds, and refused to accept backdoor deals. I was threatened twice. One of them directly. A note left on my car windshield saying, "Those who rise too fast fall hard." But I had already fallen too many times to be afraid. It was during that time I met Governor Elias Fontes, a popular politician from the Northeast, known for his direct manner and unlikely alliances. We met at a debate on youth and democracy. I spoke, he listened. Later backstage he said, "There are people in here who don't know who you are. But I do. Keep an eye out, Gabriel. You're going to rise even more." I didn't take it seriously then. I kept doing my grassroots work, now with more visibility. Until one day Deputy Reynaldo called me for a private talk. He said he was retiring and that he would endorse me as a pre-candidate for the legislative chamber. "You're the right name, Gabriel. You don't have a political surname, you're not from a rich family. But you have something most here will never have: truth." The news spread like wildfire. Part of the party resisted. I was young with no economic base, no surname. But the people, oh, the people embraced me. On every corner, every market, every school where I spoke, people listened with attentive eyes, as if seeing in me a spark they themselves carried but never knew how to name. And so, with a campaign made of small donations, handmade flyers, and speeches atop wooden crates, I became the most voted candidate in the history of my region. On the day of inauguration, wearing a borrowed suit, I entered the plenary with a racing heart. I sat down, took a deep breath, and for the first time looked ahead without fear. In the audience, among journalists and onlookers, was the governor. When he saw me, he stood up, pointed, and said loudly, "That's him. The senator of the people. Not by title yet, but by soul." The cameras recorded. The newspapers reproduced. And my life once again changed forever. Being elected was a victory. But what came next was war. Politics, I discovered, was much dirtier and crueler than I could imagine. The backstage that seemed vibrant and democratic from afar revealed itself as a rusty machine, powered by favors, blackmail, and shady interests. And when someone like me, no surname, no strings attached, starts to shake the structures, the system strikes back hard. In my first week as district deputy, I filed 2 bills. One to allocate direct funds for technical schools in poor communities, and another to enforce transparency in government contracts with outsourced companies. On paper they seemed harmless ideas. In practice, I clashed with businessmen, veteran politicians, and even members of my own party. An experienced aide called me to talk in the corridor in a paternal tone. "Gabriel, this isn't how it works. You want to change everything at once? You'll end up isolated." I replied, "Better isolated than complicit." The next week, my office was emptied by party leadership orders. They cut funds, reduced staff, canceled agendas. The justification was internal restructuring, but I knew what it really was. Silent punishment. They wanted to silence me without making noise. But instead of backing down, I doubled down. I started live streams showing the day-to-day of my mandate. I exposed meetings, votes, behind the scenes. People began to watch, comment, and support. I became an annoying but popular name. With popularity came attack. A manipulated conversation leaked, supposedly showing me negotiating positions. It was a lie, of course, but sensationalist media loved it. I spent days being crushed. I slept little, ate even less. Even my mother called crying. "Gabriel, why are they doing this to you?" I had no answer. Only the certainty that I was on the right path. Governor Elias Fontes, who until then treated me as a promising figure, called me for an urgent talk. I expected more criticism or warnings. But he looked me in the eye and said, "The elite is scared of you. That's a good sign. Just be careful not to become a martyr before your time." "And will you support me?" I asked. He smiled bitterly. "Support, maybe. Not always. Sometimes the system swallows even those with good intentions." That conversation stayed with me. I realized even well-intentioned people bow down out of fear or pragmatism. But I couldn't. Not after coming so far. Not after seeing Dona Marina die dreaming of a fairer Brazil. The worst came months later. I uncovered $1 million scheme involving overpriced construction in abandoned schools. I had proof, documents, witnesses. I denounced it. The case blew up. Headlines, investigations, and finally the arrest of 2 businessmen and a former secretary. But I also received threats. My car was followed. A drone flew over my house 2 nights in a row. My parents started receiving anonymous calls. I knew the game had escalated. I went to the police, asked for protection. They listened, took reports. But deep down I knew I was on my own. So I didn't back down. At the next chamber session I entered, looked colleagues in the eye and said, "Silence is complicity. Omission is consent. If I fall standing." I left cheered by some, hated by many. But that night I slept in peace. The price of truth is high. But the value of dignity is priceless. The first threat was subtle. An anonymous note left on my windshield, hastily scribbled in shaky handwriting, "You've gone too far." I threw it away. Then came the silent phone calls, always at night, always after important chamber sessions. I still didn't realize that my exposure as a combative politician with no strings attached had turned on red lights in places where shadows preferred to remain untouched. One morning when I opened the newspaper, I saw my photo on an article titled, "Gabriel Souza, Savior or Threat?" The report mixed facts and assumptions, trying to paint me as a reckless radical pouring gasoline on the system. It was the wounded powers reaction, and they were ready to fight back. My communication team was terrified. The haters on social media multiplied. They invented a son I never had. They said I used public money for trips, even though all were recorded and had legislative purposes. My girlfriend, Clara, almost lost her job after an anonymous complaint. It was all orchestrated. The peak was when my office was broken into. They took documents, tore files. The guards said they saw nothing. The surveillance cameras, coincidentally, were down that night. I sat in the worn leather chair, looked around, and felt the weight of silence. It was no longer just politics. It was personal. In one of the tensest sessions that semester, a veteran deputy asked to speak and, with a calm but cutting voice, said, "There is a difference between idealism and recklessness. Some young people get fired up and forget this parliament has rules, history, weight, and consequences." It was a disguised threat dressed as a lesson. But I smiled and replied, "That's true. And every story perpetuated only to protect those at the top ceases to be democracy and becomes a fiefdom." I was not elected to kiss rings. The chamber erupted in murmurs. That night I received 3 calls from unknown numbers. In one, a male voice, hoarse and calm, said, "You've caused too much trouble, Senator." "Yes, we already call you that. But senators die too, you know." I was silent. Hung up. Felt a tear roll down, not of fear but indignation. That was the portrait of a wounded country. I knew. My name had become a target. And those who had weapons, symbolic and real, were aiming. But I didn't stop. I set up a network of volunteer lawyers for victims of police abuse. I introduced an amendment requiring parliamentarians to publicly disclose all office expenses in real time. I created a direct channel with communities for corruption reports on public works. Every new move was met with retaliation. My social media was hacked. Fake profiles spread misinformation. I was summoned based on an absurd complaint of abuse of legislative authority. Even Clara, always strong, had an anxiety attack. One night she said to me, "Aren't you afraid of dying?" I answered with what Donna Marina taught me. I am afraid, but I'm more afraid of dying in silence. The next week I was in a peripheral community where, months earlier, police had killed 2 young men. I organized a traveling public hearing right there on the dirt field where it had happened. Over 500 people came. When I finished my speech, the crowd gave a standing ovation. Elders cried. Youth raised banners. That was what moved me. When I left, I saw a patrol car slow down beside me. The officer in the passenger seat stared at me. He didn't smile. He just made a gesture with his index finger crossing his neck. A warning. What saved me was visibility. The more people saw me, the less chance they had to erase me without consequences. But it was like walking on shards of glass. One night when I was leaving an event, a black car blocked my path. 4 men got out. One of them pushed me against the wall and said, "Stop now, or you'll wake up with lead in your tongue." They laughed, got back in the car, and disappeared. I filed a police report. Nothing was investigated. The following week, I received a call from Governor Elias Fontes himself. He requested an urgent meeting. "Gabriel, you have stirred up the untouchables. People who don't appear on the ballots but decide who rises and who falls. They want your head. Literally. And there are people inside our party passing information to them." I swallowed hard. "And are you with me?" "I am. But I don't know how long I'll be able to protect you. You'll have to choose, either step back, or go to war." I looked into his eyes and said, "I'm already at war. Since the day I was born." The pressure I felt no longer fit inside me. It spread to every corner of my life. Politics, which once seemed like a ground where I could plant justice, was becoming a hostile jungle where rules were dictated by the strongest, those who didn't hesitate to use fear and corruption to stay in power. That call from Governor Elias Fontes wouldn't leave my mind. He had given me a clear ultimatum: you'll have to choose, either step back, or go to war. But what he didn't know was that I had been at war long before. Since the day I stepped into that chamber carrying my mother's dream and the weight of my origin, I knew I couldn't turn back. When I entered the office for that scheduled meeting, the air was heavy. Elias was there as always, a man who looked at me with a mix of hope and fatigue. But this time he was not alone. By his side was José Carvalho, an influential businessman whose reputation was surrounded by dark rumors and shady deals. A man who, in the political underworld, was synonymous with the power hiding behind the curtains of the palace. "Gabriel," the governor began with a grave and measured voice, "you have enormous potential, a bright future in politics. But you need to understand that change doesn't happen overnight. And more importantly, there are unwritten rules here. If you want to survive, you'll have to play the game." José Carvalho smiled calculatingly, that smile that seemed to know all the world's secrets but expressed neither trust nor kindness. "Gabriel, I really admire your courage and idealism," he said softly, almost seductively. "But the real world isn't made of just dreams. We can help you rise, gain support, resources, and stability. In return, you avoid some trouble and turn a blind eye to some things. Also, we can keep moving forward." My heart raced, a mix of anger, disappointment, and disgust flooding my body. It was the classic proposal. Sell your soul, abandon your principles, and you will succeed. A success built on corruption and hypocrisy. "I'm not for sale." My voice came out firm, cold. "I won't give up my values for any money, for any influence." The governor's look was hard to decipher. There was a mix of respect for my courage and a deep sadness, almost resignation. "They won't give up on you, Gabriel," he said in a lower tone. "If you refuse this help, you'll face harsher attacks, maybe even risk your own life. You don't know who you're messing with. Some of these groups control way more than what the ballots show. And there are people in our party collaborating with them." I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of those words. I knew that wasn't an empty warning. It was a real alert, coming from someone who had navigated the system long enough to know the game was dirty. "And you?" I asked, looking straight into the governor's eyes. "Will you protect me?" I'm doing what I can. But there are limits, Gabriel. Sometimes even the best have to choose battles they can win. I left that room with a heavy body as if I'd taken a punch to the stomach. The war was no longer a metaphor. It was real, cruel, and imminent. In the weeks that followed, the harassment increased exponentially. My reputation was the target of a silent but deadly campaign. Social media bombarded with lies, fake profiles spreading rumors about my personal and professional life. They even invented a child of mine, using that to cast doubts on my moral integrity. My girlfriend Claire was one of the most affected. Because of an anonymous complaint, she almost lost her job. Threats began reaching those I loved. I felt the war surrounding me on all sides. It was in this moment of darkness that an unexpected light appeared. Community leaders from neighborhoods I had visited, people I knew from my travels across the country, sought me out. They wanted me to be their voice, to lead a resistance front against the corruption destroying their lives. In every meeting, in every conversation with those people, I saw the true reason for my fight. It wasn't just about politics, power, or positions. It was about hope, dignity, and justice for those who had always been forgotten. That feeling renewed my strength. I knew that, despite the siege, I was not alone. The voice of the people was my shield and my weapon. But the enemy did not give up. At any moment they could try to silence that voice forever. One of those nights, leaving an event, I was blocked by a black car. 4 men got out, pushed me against the wall, and said coldly, "Stop now or you'll wake up with lead in your tongue." They laughed, got in the car, and disappeared into the dark street. I filed a police report, but I knew it would be just another ignored record. The governor called me again. The conversation was direct. "You messed with people who don't appear on the ballots but control who rises and who falls. There are people in our party passing information to them. They want your head." "Literally?" I asked. "And are you with me?" He replied, "Yes, but I don't know how long I can protect you. You'll have to choose, step back or go all the way." I looked at him and said with all the conviction I had, "I'm already at the end, since the day I was born." At that moment I realized the politics I knew was over. Now it was only about survival, and the fight to change what seemed unchangeable. The pressure was no longer just political or social. It was personal, almost tangible, like a shadow that followed me wherever I went. The constant feeling of being watched, that every step could be the last, started corroding my mind and my days. The city seemed different, colder, and even the streets I knew like the back of my hand gave me chills. After the last meeting with Governor Elias Fontes, I knew the siege was closing. They weren't just trying to intimidate me, they were preparing something bigger, more dangerous. My allies in the party began avoiding my gaze. The smiles that were once there now carried doubt and fear. I felt something was about to explode, and at any moment everything could collapse. The first evidence came on a rainy Sunday when I received an anonymous message on my cell phone. "You know what's at stake. Stop or you'll lose everything," and much more. There was no sender, just those cold words. That put me on high alert. That week my schedules were all changed. I could no longer walk the streets with the same freedom. Clara began accompanying me to every meeting, and even she felt the weight of fear. We went together to a meeting at the community center in the neighborhood where I grew up. There I found familiar faces, women, men, youth, waiting silently for me to speak. They placed their hope in me, the hope I tried to sustain, but which was already starting to falter because of fatigue and pressure. As I spoke about the importance of continuing the fight, my phone rang in my pocket. An unknown number. I answered, expecting the worst. On the other end, a cold, emotionless voice said, "You think you're invincible, Senator? The game is over. Take the next wrong step and we'll make sure no one ever remembers your name." My heart raced, but I stayed firm. "I won't give up." "Then prepare yourself. They're already everywhere." I hung up, and the silence that followed was louder than any scream. In the following days, the threats increased. My car showed deep scratches on the bodywork, my house was vandalized, and one night Clara found a note stuck on the door, "Give up or pay the price." The police once again filed the reports, but nothing was done beyond the basic protocol. I knew the system was involved up to its neck, and my protection was an illusion. Amid all this, I tried to keep normality at work. I introduced new bills, exposed more schemes, gathered evidence. My team was small but dedicated. And even with constant fear, I felt I was on the right path. Until at a decisive session of the chamber, when I voted against a suspicious measure that favored a big businessman linked to Jose Carvalho. the atmosphere became hostile. Some colleagues began surrounding me, whispering veiled threats. At that moment something changed. I realized I was not alone. A group of deputies, tired of corruption, discreetly approached, offering silent support. It was the first time I felt a spark of hope amid the chaos. But the victory came with a price. An ambush in the chamber parking lot. 2 masked men tried to attack me, but thanks to the quick reaction of the security guards, I escaped unharmed. That attack was the trigger. I decided to go public with everything, denouncing not only the threats but also the system's complicity in silencing those who fight for justice. In a tense press conference, I spoke to cameras and microphones. Today, I denounce not only corruption schemes but also the siege they try to impose to silence me. They won't succeed. If I fall, I hope my fall inspires others to raise their voices. The words echoed, dividing opinions. But for me, it was a moment of liberation. Clara, though worried, stood by my side, stronger than ever. I knew from then on there was no turning back. The siege was closing, and what came next depended on the strength I found within myself and the people who chose to follow me. I woke that morning to the sound of rain beating hard against my bedroom window. It was one of those gray days when the sky seems to carry the weight of the world, and you feel on your skin that something big is about to happen. I didn't know exactly what, but the feeling that my life was about to change radically was inescapable. At that moment, the accumulated fatigue of turbulent weeks seemed to want to knock me down, but the will to stay strong was even greater. Clara had already left early for work, and the house was silent except for the noise of the rain. I grabbed my cell phone to review some notes and messages before the day's schedule, when an urgent alert appeared. There was a protest scheduled for that afternoon in front of the Legislative Assembly, called by social movements supporting my denunciations. It was a clear sign that my fight was gaining ground in public opinion, but also that tensions could escalate even further. My team spent the entire morning preparing strategies to ensure the event would be peaceful and that I could speak without risks. I was ready to face that crowd, to look into each person's eyes and reaffirm my commitment. But no one was prepared for what was to come. When I arrived at the assembly, thousands of people were already gathered, holding signs, shouting slogans, demanding justice. The atmosphere was hopeful but also tense. We knew opposing groups and even hired militias could show up to provoke disturbances. The speech I had prepared the night before was locked in my mind, hammering the message that change required courage, unity, and persistence. I stepped onto the makeshift stage, looked at that crowd, and felt a mixture of emotion and responsibility tightening my chest. "Friends," I began with a firm voice, "today we are here because we believe in a different Brazil, one that is just and transparent. I won't lie to you, this fight has been tough, dangerous. They have tried to silence me, threatened me, tried to make me give up. But I am here because the strength that comes from you is greater than any fear." The words echoed throughout the space, amid applause and cries of support. It was a magical moment, one that stays etched in the soul forever. But as I spoke, a movement behind caught my attention. Hooded men began approaching, pushing people, throwing objects, trying to create panic. Security tried to contain them, but chaos took over. I saw Clara being shoved, almost falling, and my heart raced. I ran to protect her and to try to calm the crowd, but the chaos was already settled. In the middle of that whirlwind of shouts and running, a shot rang out. Time seemed to slow down. People fell, screams turned into silences cut by tears and fear. I tried to understand where the sound came from, but everything was confusion. My body froze for a moment. Fear, disbelief, anger. In that mess, I noticed a suspicious-looking man running towards me, armed. Without thinking, I moved to block him, fighting with all my strength to prevent him from getting closer. The struggle was intense. We managed to knock him down, and the police, finally arriving in force, arrested the attacker. The crowd, still in shock, slowly dispersed while fear still hung in the air. At that moment, I understood that my fight was no longer just political. It was a battle for life, dignity, and the hope that so many people had placed in me. At the police station, the investigations began, but the attacker was only the tip of the iceberg. I found out he had connections with militia groups and dark sectors that feared my actions. Governor Elias Fontes, upon learning what happened, came to visit me at the hospital. His eyes were tired, but there was renewed respect. "Gabriel," he said in a grave voice, "this was proof that you stirred up a nest of vipers. Many will back down, but you are not like the others. You are determined to go all the way. And you? I asked, worried. Will you help me survive this storm? I can't guarantee anything, he replied, but as long as I'm here, I will do my best. Clara stayed by my side, taking care of me, and even in the worst moments, her presence was what kept me standing. In the days that followed, my life turned into a hurricane. Between hearings, interviews, meetings, and moments of silence to try to regain strength, I saw the enormous responsibility I carried. Many still did not believe me, attacked me, tried to belittle my fight. But those who supported me, who believed in change, were my true strength. And I knew that, even if the storm was the greatest I had ever faced, I would not, back down. This was the time to show Brazil who the man behind the senator really was. That day at the Legislative Assembly went down in the history of my life, and the history of my country. I knew it wouldn't be an ordinary speech, but a decisive moment, a turning point. The room was packed, but there was a heavy, almost palpable silence. Politics, behind all the formalities, was an arena where every word could be a weapon or a shield. When I stood to speak, I felt the attentive gaze of dozens of peers, some friends, many adversaries. I took a deep breath and began. Ladies and gentlemen, my voice rang out strong. I'm here not to ask for sympathy or favors, but to denounce a reality everyone knows but few have the courage to face. I spoke about the corruption scheme I had uncovered, the overpriced contracts, the abandoned works, the public money diverted while schools and hospitals suffered. I showed evidence, documents, testimonies. I spoke of people who work every day, pay taxes, and deserve an honest government. During the speech, I felt a mix of tension and hope. Some tried to interrupt, others whispered, but I kept my focus. Brazil can no longer tolerate this impunity. I exclaimed firmly. It's time to put an end to it. When I finished, a heavy silence took over the room. But then a wave of applause exploded, coming from young parliamentarians and those who, even against the system, wished for change. Governor Elias Fontes was in the audience, and I saw him look at me with a mix of pride and apprehension. At that moment, I understood that my speech had shaken the foundations of a corrupt system, and that from that day forward there was no turning back. From that day on, my life became a whirlwind. The media put me at the center of attention, and social networks turned me into a symbol of the fight against corruption. But the attacks increased. Anonymous threats became constant, my family was targeted by intimidation, and fear became part of the routine. Even so, popular support grew. Ordinary people from all classes started sending me messages, participating in protests, believing that politics could indeed be different. I was no longer just a politician. I was the voice of a tired people, the hope for true change. And despite all the weight and danger, I knew I was exactly where I needed to be. The world seemed to conspire against me. Every step forward in my fight to expose corruption became a minefield, where invisible and powerful enemies waited to bring down anyone who dared challenge the system. But it was precisely in this scenario of threats and insecurities that the flame of hope shone brightest within me. After the speech that shook the Legislative Assembly's foundations, my routine changed into something I had never imagined. The pressure from the media was constant. Cameras and microphones followed my every move as if I were the only hope for an entire country. Every word I said had repercussions that echoed far beyond the assembly hall. However, politics is a cruel and merciless arena. Friends became adversaries, allies hesitated, and fear crept in like a shadow through the halls of power. That's when I realized that the real battle was not only in public denunciations or investigations I had pushed forward, but in the ability to maintain integrity amid a sea of betrayals and personal interests. Clara became my safe harbor. In moments when the weight of the fight seemed almost unbearable, her steady gaze and words of encouragement made me find the strength to continue. At home, away from the cameras, we shared our fears and hopes, preparing ourselves for the next battle we knew would come. The attacks intensified. Anonymous letters, threatening messages, and attempts to destabilize my image became routine. One night when I arrived home, I found my garage door broken and suspicious marks on the car. The police filed a report, but I knew official protection was limited against the forces that wanted to silence me. It was then that a silent network of supporters began to form. Ordinary people, outraged citizens, independent journalists, and even politicians from other parties who believed in justice joined to protect me and strengthen the cause. Together, we created alternative communication channels, organized debates, and kept the flame of truth alive despite adverse winds. In one of those clandestine meetings, we discussed the importance of not backing down. The path was difficult, but victory was possible. Mutual trust and commitment to social transformation gave us courage to face the unknown. Governor Elias Fontes, despite political limitations, showed discreet and vital support in crucial moments, offering resources for personal security and backing some government dealings. His ambiguous stance between pragmatism and hope helped me understand the complexities of power, where nothing is black and white. Meanwhile, the people began to see in me more than a politician. I was the embodiment of resistance, the dream for a better Brazil. The streets buzzed with peaceful protests, and in every face I saw the same faith that kept me standing. The journey was long and full of obstacles, but every day I learned that true transformation does not come from isolated acts, but from the union of those who refuse to be defeated by fear. And so, with courage and determination, I moved forward firmly, knowing that even in the darkest nights, hope always finds a way to shine. The days that followed were like the harbinger of a violent storm, one you know is coming but can't stop. The threats, which were once subtle, became increasingly clear and direct, hitting not only me but also Clara and my entire family. The politics I knew was a battlefield, but now it seemed like a war without truce. It all started with small signs. Anonymous messages sent during the early hours, phone calls with silence on the other end, the unsettling sound of suspicious footsteps at night. Clara tried to stay calm, but I saw the growing anguish in her eyes. My mother, who had always been a rock, began to show signs of fatigue and worry. In the midst of this suffocating atmosphere, I received news that knocked me down. Someone I deeply trusted, one of my closest advisors, was leaking information to my enemies. The betrayal tasted bitter, an open wound that bled not only my trust but the entire strategy we had carefully built. The pain of betrayal was accompanied by the discovery of a parallel investigative journalism effort, led by a group of independent and courageous journalists who, like me, refused to bow before power. They began exposing names, contracts, and shady deals connected to the corrupt individuals I was denouncing. It was a light in the darkness. With this unexpected alliance, we started to organize a more visible and structured resistance. Secret meetings multiplied, now with a reinforced team of people willing to face the storm head-on. Clara stood by my side through every moment, strengthening my spirit. But the pressure didn't ease. With each passing day, the feeling of danger grew, and the strategy had to adapt to protect me and those with me. Between fear and hope, I learned that politics is, above all, a game of endurance. And it was precisely this endurance that gave me the strength to move forward, because I knew the storm was fierce, but I was not alone. There was an entire nation waiting to see how far I could go, and I was determined to go all the way. The pressure was palpable, like a rope tightening slowly around my neck, threatening to choke me at any moment. After the betrayal within my own circle, I realized the siege was closing in from all sides. It was no longer just veiled threats. Now there was an explicit plan to take me down. The investigations I had initiated had become an uncontrollable fire, burning the reputations of the powerful and revealing secrets many thought buried forever. And as expected, they reacted with full force. That rainy morning, I received an anonymous call warning that an operation to discredit me was about to be launched. False accusations, video manipulations, even a fraudulent lawsuit would be used to silence me. But I was not willing to back down. I knew the fight was no longer just for me, but for all those who believed in fair politics, for those who longed for a country free of corruption and impunity. I strengthened my team, summoned allies, and organized strategies to face the storm. Meetings stretched late into the night, analyzing risks, drafting speeches, and planning counterattacks. Clara, my tireless companion, was my fortress, supporting me when exhaustion almost knocked me down. In the toughest moments, her presence was a reminder of what truly mattered. Meanwhile, the streets began to fill with voices and signs, a growing chorus of hope and resistance echoing against the corrupt system. I knew the journey was still long and dangerous, but I was determined to face the siege with my head held high. The final battle was near, and I was ready to fight to my last breath. The day I feared and awaited at the same time arrived. The special session convened to discuss the accusations against me, and those involved in the corruption scheme took over the attention of the media, the population, and, of course, the powerful who sought to bring me down. The atmosphere in the chamber was tense, filled with suspicious looks, whispers, and a feeling that every word spoken could change everything. I was prepared. Days and nights of preparation, reviewing documents, testimonies, and legal strategies. But nothing could make me fully ready for the battle ahead. When the cameras started recording my entrance, I heard timid applause mixed with boos. It was a true reflection of the polarization I had sparked. Taking the floor, I looked into the eyes of everyone present. Some friends, many enemies. I spoke with a firm voice, but loaded with the emotion of someone who knew they were not just defending their name but a greater ideal. I presented the evidence, denounced the dirty maneuvers, and clearly showed that the resistance was not just mine, but that of an entire society tired of injustice. In the middle of my speech, I felt Governor Elias Fontes' gaze fixed on me, as if silently confirming that the fight was worth it. His eyes carried a mix of respect and concern. The session went on for hours with heated debates, attempts to divert attention, and even veiled threats. But what became clear that day was that the truth was beginning to win. The lies and manipulations of the corrupt were exposed before everyone. When the vote finally began, I knew the game was far from over, but that symbolic victory was the fuel I needed to move forward. Street protests grew, independent press gained strength, and I felt that, despite everything, we were on the right path. The day of truth was not just a political confrontation. It was the awakening of a hope many had thought lost. And I was ready to keep fighting, no matter the cost. After the exhausting day of voting, calm seemed to return, but I knew it was just the surface. Behind the halls of power, the forces trying to bring me down were not sleeping. On the contrary, they were silently organizing to deliver the final blow. I received anonymous calls with veiled warnings. My phone rang at night, and on the other end only silence. Clara sensed the tension in the air, and I tried to protect her, but the truth was that no one was really safe. During a meeting with close allies, we discussed strategies to strengthen our base and avoid new attacks. Politics once again showed itself as a chess game with pieces moved in the shadows. I knew that to win, I had to be smarter, more resilient. And above all, keep the truth as my shield. In this scenario, I began to understand that power is an ambiguous force. It can be used for good or destruction. My mission was to prove that it is possible to transform politics without getting lost in the darkness. But for that, I had to be prepared for what was to come. The days after the vote were not restful, quite the opposite. I knew the real battle was just beginning. A battle fought both in the cold shadows of the halls of power and inside me, in every thought, every decision I had to make. The weight of responsibility was overwhelming. Every step I took was watched. Every whispered word could be twisted to destroy me. The feeling was like walking on a tightrope stretched over an endless abyss. One wrong step could mean a free fall. Clara became my safe harbor, my silent fortress. Between meetings and speeches, she was my refuge, the voice reminding me why I had started this journey. But I also saw in her the fear I tried to hide, the worry that this political storm could take everything away: my career, my freedom, our family's peace. In the office, the atmosphere grew more hostile. The betrayal by the aide revealed that the enemy was not only outside but hidden among those who should have been my allies. Each new meeting brought the worry that someone was listening, passing information to the adversaries. Paranoia was an inevitable side effect. But there were also external battles. The press, divided between supporters and detractors, played its game. While some independent journalists continued to support me, exposing the powerful scams, traditional outlets launched increasingly aggressive attacks. Stains on my reputation were spread, false accusations surfaced, and social networks became a minefield where heated opinions clashed. It was in this scenario that I had to strengthen my political strategy. I knew truth was my greatest weapon, but it was not enough just to have it. It had to be communicated, to win hearts and minds, to inspire hope. We organized awareness campaigns, meetings with the population, and used social media to open direct channels with people, showing what was happening behind the scenes. But the fight did not stop there. The most powerful adversaries began moving their heaviest pieces. Influential people inside the government, businessmen with shady interests, even international figures who benefited from maintaining the corrupt system, started acting to bring me down. I received clear signs they were willing to do anything. Threats became more explicit. Anonymous visits to my house, unknown cars following me, phone calls with prolonged silence. Clara insisted we seek protection, but the competent authorities seemed powerless or complicit. This only increased my feeling of isolation, of fighting alone against a giant. Amid all this, I had to face my own inner demons. Fear, doubt, mental and physical exhaustion. Many nights I slept with a racing heart, imagining the worst scenarios. I asked myself if it was worth continuing, if the fight wouldn't end up destroying everything I loved. But the memory of my mother's story, Donna Marina, her dream of a fairer country, the hope she always nurtured in me, gave me strength to carry on. Because this was not just my battle. It was for everyone who believed in a better future. I knew I needed to be patient, strategic, but also fearless. Politics, I realized, is a game of light and shadow where it's easy to get lost on the way. My mission was to keep the light on even in the darkest moments. And so, between small victories and hard blows, I remained firm, determined to transform reality, not only for me but for a whole nation beginning to awaken. As the battle intensified, I began to realize that loyalty came at a high price, and true allies were rare and precious. Among the many who approached with promises and smiles, few were willing to stand by my side when the storms hit hardest. Clara was my rock, my pillar amid the chaos. Her courage and unwavering support gave me strength to face the darkest days. But beyond her, few resisted the wear of threats, exposure, and constant pressure. Some old friends disappeared. Others, who called themselves partners, began negotiating with the adversaries behind the scenes, trying to secure their own advantages. Betrayal became an ever-present shadow, a cruel reminder that in politics the line between friend and enemy is thin. What hurt most was realizing that my own family felt the weight of this fight. My parents, who always believed in me, started aging faster, consumed by anxiety and worry. Clara, though strong, faced sleepless nights trying to protect our home and future. In the midst of this storm, I learned that loyalty is not measured only in words but in deeds. Every gesture of support, every silent sacrifice, every constant presence was a thread that kept the fabric of my resistance intact. I also learned to value small victories. A message of encouragement from a voter, a public statement from a colleague who still believed in change, an honest report exposing injustices. But I knew the greatest challenge was yet to come. Because politics does not forgive those who insist on challenging the status quo, and the powerful would do anything to make sure I fell. The price of loyalty was high, but the value of keeping integrity was priceless. With each passing day, the storm surrounding my political and personal life grew more intense, threatening to destroy everything I had achieved. The attacks from enemies were no longer just behind the scenes. Now they became public, visible, trying to crush me in front of everyone's eyes. Sensationalist newspaper headlines came with baseless accusations, manipulated leaks, and edited images to create a distorted narrative of my struggle. On social media, personal attacks became the main tone, turning my name into the target of massive defamation campaigns. I felt the overwhelming weight of public judgment from people who never knew me, judging my life and intentions based on rumors and lies. It was one of the loneliest moments in my journey. But amid this chaos, protests began to grow. Ordinary people from the outskirts, from small towns, from all over, started taking to the streets in my defense. These were voices that had never been heard before, but now rose united, demanding justice and transparency. I saw in every face the reflection of the hope that kept me strong. The pressure of the crowd, the noise of the voices, the warmth of solidarity, all of it gave me strength to resist. However, I knew the storm wouldn't pass without leaving deep scars. My office was invaded, documents disappeared, and physical threats increased. Clara had to leave the city temporarily for safety, and I was torn between continuing the fight or protecting those I loved. It was a decisive moment. The choice between fear and courage, between yielding to pressure or standing firm in the mission I had taken on. I chose to fight, because the real storm was not outside, it was inside me. It was the fight against doubt, exhaustion, and the desire to give up. And I had to win that storm, not only for myself but for everyone who believed in a better future. The decision not to back down, to remain firm in the middle of the storm, was not easy. Every dawn brought the certainty that the road ahead would be even tougher. But giving up was not in my vocabulary, not after everything I had already accomplished, not after everything my mother, Donna Marina, had dreamed for me and the country. Threats kept coming, more aggressive and clear every day. My car was stoned on a quiet street, and that night, alone at home, the sound of breaking glass echoed like a warning that the enemies were getting closer. They were no longer just shadows. Now they had faces and intent. Clara returned to the city with the firmness of someone who understands that the fight is ours, but also the strength of the love that unites us. Together we mapped strategies not just to survive but to advance. We started taking more care of security, monitoring every move but without letting fear take over. Courage was our greatest weapon. In the middle of this war I realized something fundamental. It's not just about me. Every gesture, every word, every approved project had the power to change the lives of thousands of people. It was a responsibility that consumed me but also gave me purpose. We organized community debates, brought the word of hope to forgotten neighborhoods, talked with young people who saw politics as a path for transformation. Their stories, their dreams fed my spirit. I was not fighting just for myself, I was fighting for them, for everyone who believed change was possible. But the political pressure did not relent. The opposition increased the offensive, trying to undermine my credibility with empty investigations, with heated speeches that sought to discredit even my honor. It was a dirty game of personal interests that had nothing to do with the common good. Amid this turmoil, doubt was also present. In moments of silence before sleeping, I asked myself if it was worth sacrificing so much: health, family, inner peace. But it was enough to remember Clara's shining eyes, the shy smile of a boy from the community who dreamed of studying at a school I helped renovate, to know I could not stop. Politics, I learned, is a terrain of difficult choices and winding paths. But it is also the space where courage turns into change, and where faith in the future is the light that guides the most uncertain steps. At that moment I was ready to face whatever came. Because being a senator was not just a title. It was a commitment to truth, justice, and hope. And I was not alone in this fight. After months immersed in political battles, threats, and distrust, I began to feel the light at the end of the tunnel shining more intensely. It wasn't an easy or comfortable light. It was harsh, demanding, like the truth I always carried with me. But it was a light that promised redemption, not only for me but for a whole people tired of injustices. My work in the chamber started to bear concrete fruits. Projects once shelved began to move forward, social agendas gained prominence. And most importantly, the voice of the marginalized began to be heard more strongly. I felt that, despite everything, my mission was fulfilling its role. Clara stayed by my side. Her strength was my constant inspiration. The family, once fragmented by pressure, now united around our purpose. True friends, although few, were an invaluable support. But politics is never simple. The resistance of the powerful remained firm, trying to delay or thwart changes. Even so, with each victory I felt we were closer to what I always dreamed of. A future where justice and dignity prevailed. More than positions or titles, true redemption was knowing that my choices, my fights, had transformed lives, had given hope to those who needed it most. And so, with a firm heart and a renewed soul, I kept walking, ready for the next challenges that life and politics still reserved. The months that followed were of growing tension, but also relentless determination. Pressure on me increased from all sides, from the media, political opponents, and even those who once called themselves allies but preferred to distance themselves when faced with risk. Sleepless nights became routine, and the weight of responsibility seemed to grow every dawn. Yet despite the fatigue, there was a flame that wouldn't go out. It was the flame of hope, the hope that brought me there, that made me persist even when it seemed all was lost. I was not fighting only for myself, but for every person who believed Brazil could be different, could be better. The moment of the final great battle arrived. A session in the chamber that would decide the future of one of the most important projects of my career. A law guaranteeing greater transparency and oversight over public accounts, a tool that could disarm many corrupt schemes. That day the legislative house was packed. Heated speeches filled the chamber, and the air was thick with expectation and tension. I knew many would try to bring me down, using all the weapons they had to discredit me, to silence me once and for all. But when it was my turn to speak, something changed inside me. The words came out strong, clear, and emotional. I spoke not just as a politician, but as a man who had lived and felt injustice, betrayal, and hope. I spoke about the courage of those who refused to accept a corrupt system, about the responsibility to represent those who were never heard. My voice echoed through that chamber, and for a moment, silence took over. Eyes that were once suspicious began to turn to respect, even among adversaries. I felt that, at that moment, the game was changing. The vote was tight, but the law was approved. It was a victory that seemed small compared to everything I had lived, but it marked a milestone. a concrete step toward the change I had always dreamed of. In the following weeks, I received messages of support from ordinary people, workers, young students, community leaders, all thanking me for that achievement. Each message was a reminder that the fight was worth it. Still, I knew the war was not over. The system I faced was powerful and ruthless and would resist every attempt at transformation. But for the first time, I felt I was not alone, that I had awakened a larger movement, a collective desire for justice. And then, in one of the sessions, something happened that I will never forget. Governor Elias Fontes, who once warned me about the dangers of the path, stood up in the chamber, looked directly at me and said out loud, "It's him. It's this man who, against all odds and against everyone, has shown the courage our country so desperately needs. He is the senator." At that moment, what was once doubt, disbelief, and hostility turned into recognition and respect. I had won. But the greatest victory was not political nor public. It was personal. It was proving to myself, to my family, to Brazil, that even when no one believes in you, truth, courage, and perseverance can change history. With my eyes fixed on the future, I continued my mission. Not as a lonely man, but as part of a people who finally began to believe that change is possible. After the historic victory in the transparency law vote, I felt an intense mixture of relief and responsibility. Relief to see that my effort had finally brought concrete results. Responsibility because I knew this achievement was only the beginning, that true transformation depended on what came next. In the days that followed, the impact of my work grew rapidly. It was no longer just some communities or isolated groups supporting me. A bigger movement began to form. People from all corners of the country inspired by our fight, wanting to be part of this change. I received hundreds of letters, emails, and messages. In all of them, stories of lives marked by injustice but also by hope for a better future. Each account moved me deeply, reinforcing the importance of our battle. In one of these messages, a young teacher from a small inland town wrote about how the school where she worked would finally start receiving adequate resources thanks to our project. She said many students had never had decent school supplies but now would begin to dream of real possibilities. Reading those words reminded me of the beginning of my journey, the difficulties I faced, and the promise I made to my mother, Dona Marina, to never give up. Her hope, which seemed so distant, now shone in every face I could help. Of course, the path was not and would never be easy. The opposition continued, though diminished, trying to discredit my work. Powerful interest groups did not want to give up their privileges and did everything to sabotage changes. But something had fundamentally changed. The population, more aware and engaged, began demanding results and transparency from their representatives. This popular pressure turned into political power, a true turning point. Amid all this, my personal life was also transforming. Clara, who had been with me from the start, became my partner not only in the fight but in life. We built together a future that once seemed unattainable, amidst challenges and victories. I was no longer the disbelieved man who once saw his family doubt him. I was the senator who, against all odds, managed to turn distrust into respect and silence into an active voice. And most importantly, I was part of a new generation that believed in the power of change. Reflecting on everything I lived, I realized that true transformation begins within each one of us. The courage to face difficulties, the resilience to continue despite obstacles, and the faith that a better future is possible. My story is not just mine. It is the story of millions of Brazilians who, even when no one believed, kept hope alive and fought to make Brazil a fairer country. Today, with pride and humility, I continue my work in the Senate, certain that the best is yet to come. The journey is long, but renewed hope is the fuel that moves me. And so, with a firm heart and eyes on the horizon, I keep believing in the power of truth, justice, and courage. Because no one needs to be alone to change the world. Getting here was a journey that surpassed all my expectations, and at the same time confirmed everything I have always believed. No one believed in me. My own family, my community, political leaders. But I did not give up. I persisted because I knew the truth was on my side, because I knew a better future was possible. Today, as a senator, I look back and see the marks of this path. Intense struggles, moments of doubt, threats that almost made me back down. But I also see the achievements, the approved projects, the voices we made echo, the faces of those whose lives were transformed. The greatest legacy I can leave is not titles or positions, but proof that courage and integrity can defeat even the most powerful and entrenched systems. I recall with affection and emotion every step of this journey. The pain of losing Dona Marina, who left me with a dream and a purpose. The strength of Clara, who taught me the importance of having someone to walk beside. The unexpected support of Governor Elias Fontes, who despite his limitations showed that it is possible to recognize value even amid political games. But more than anything, I remember the people who believed in me even when no one else did. Those who saw in me a reflection of their own hopes and pains. It is for them that I dedicate every victory. In the halls of the Senate, among speeches and negotiations, I carry with me the voice of those who have always been silenced. And I make sure to remind that power is only legitimate when it serves the people. The fight continues because changing a country is not the task of one man, but of an entire generation willing to resist, dream, and act. Today, when they call me senator, I do not feel just the weight of a title, but the responsibility of representing millions who still hope for justice, dignity, and a real chance for change. If my story serves as inspiration for someone who feels disbelieved, excluded, or invisible, then all of this was worth it. Never underestimate the power of truth, courage, and perseverance. Even when it seems that no one believes, that is where transformation begins. The future is open, and it is our duty to write it with hope, courage, and justice. I am Gabriel, the son no one believed in, until the governor pointed and said, "It's him." The senator. And this is just the first page of a story still being written.